More on this, so let's bring in Antony Loewenstein. He's a journalist and author of the Palestine Laboratory. He was based in occupied East Jerusalem between 2016 and 2020. Antony, always good to have you on the News Hour. Do you think that the Israelis have come up with this plan for the evacuation to go into Rafah, but they provided very little detail of how they're going to do this? Could this partly be a plan to appease their U.S. allies who have warned against a military operation in Rafah?
Certainly to appease them, but as we've seen time and time again, the Americans seemingly don't want more detail. I mean, I noticed in the last 24 hours, senior US officials expressing concern about the lack of detail from the Israelis. We've literally seen this playbook over and over again. And important to note, where exactly are these Palestinians supposed to go? There is literally nowhere safe in Gaza. And that, of course, leaves the open of two options. One, they simply get moved or forcibly displaced within their own territory, so Gaza. Or, yet again, there's ongoing and increasing pressure on Egypt to take a large number of these people, which, of course, Egypt has thus far refused to do, despite being an attempted bribes from Israel and the US and more weapons. So, yet again, the lack of detail does not seem to actually force the hand of the US or the European allies, or for that matter, Arab countries, most of which have signalled rhetorical opposition to what's going on, but no actual action against what Israel has been doing for 4.5 months, let alone what they might do in Rafah.
Do you think this is also part of Israel's bigger plan, or at least members of Israel's war cabinet, to displace Gazans, whether it is within the enclave itself or across the border to Egypt?
The short answer is yes, but I think it's even worse than that you have many public opinion polls within the Israeli public. This is certainly before October 7 and most certainly since, including in the last couple of weeks, that find huge amounts of support within Israel for the ongoing war. You know, in the international community, or certainly parts, there is a demand to end the war. But that is not a view shared by the majority of Israelis. Of course, there are some who very much do oppose the war, and some of them are protesting in the last 24 hours within Israel. But it's a tiny minority. There is a large constituency within the Israeli public that has long advocated for the forcible removal of Palestinians, frankly, from all of Palestine, but including Gaza, and those views have strengthened since October 7. So the constituency is there. The question is, where are they supposed to go, and will Egypt or any other party allow this to happen? Now, thus far, Egypt has not. And the fear really is that for many Palestinians, including friends of mine who are Palestinian in Gaza, they have nowhere to go. And the only option they really can imagine is somehow leaving through whatever means they can do, out of Rafah, essentially, across the border into Egypt. But this is a really horrific situation. Like, why has there not been any serious power putting, for example, an arms embargo on Israel? Why is there no more serious action? Words are not enough anymore after 4.5 months of this carnage.
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Why haven't we seen things like weapons sanctions, financial sanctions, which ultimately, when Israel is called an apartheid state, the end of apartheid in South Africa came along because the country was starved economically, yes, because of sanctions. One of Netanyahu's goals that he's maintained for a long time now is to get rid of Hamas in Gaza. He says the Rafah operation has to go ahead to destroy the last remaining battalions of Hamas in that area. But since October 7th, how much has Israel done to actually weaken Hamas within the Gaza Strip itself? Because even if they destroy all of Hamas, surely another group will just emerge from that.
According to US and Israeli intelligence, and obviously anything they say should be taken with a grain of salt, but certainly according to the sources I've heard from both the US and Israel, yes, Israel has destroyed and killed vast numbers of Hamas fighters. How many? We don't know, between 6 to 12, so they allege, 1,000. But thousands upon thousands still exist. And in fact, in the north of Gaza, after Israel went in there initially, after October 7, or when the ground invasion began later in October last year, once many Israeli troops then went to the center and the southern part of Gaza, what they found is that Hamas started reappearing in the north, started trying to reestablish its influence and power. So, as you rightly say, you can try to destroy every single Palestinian militant, which is frankly impossible. Many of them melt into the background. And frankly, many Palestinians, not all, but many support the legitimate right of Palestinians to resist occupation. I'm not saying they all support October 7. I'm saying that they support the right to resist. And many Israelis, tragically, both in the political elites but also the wider public, have ignored the lesson of what October 7 should show, which is you will not ever get safety, ever, unless Palestinians are also safe. This is either in the Gaza or West Bank. And frankly, in the last 4.5 months, the situation has become so much more catastrophic that Israelis are now much more unsafe, and frankly, Jews around the world, than they were on October 7. That's the tragic reality that Israelis do not want to hear.
Do Israelis who support the ongoing war in Gaza, and you talk about their safety, do they really feel that unless there is no Palestine, that there are no more Palestinians, that there is no threat from Hamas or any other groups, they will truly feel safe? Is this something that they are taught in Israel? Is it part of a wider conversation where they feel that the rights of Palestinians don't need to come into account here because ultimately the Jewish state itself is unsafe?
I mean, the short answer is that indoctrination within the Israeli political space, the education system, the media is so extraordinary. And since October 7, as many Israeli journalists have said, certainly the good ones, Palestinian suffering doesn't exist in the media. Of course, you can find it online if you want to look for it. But in general, Palestinians do not really exist. And you know that because, as many viewers will have seen, huge amounts of Israeli soldiers are shamelessly putting themselves on TikTok and other social media platforms, utterly not just destroying Palestine, dehumanizing Palestinians, sexualizing Palestinian women. I mean, the list goes on. And it goes long before October 7, where there has been a decades-long campaign within the Israeli state, and frankly in much of the Jewish diaspora, to dehumanize Palestinians. And the tragic irony is that Zionism was born allegedly to protect Jews when they claimed over 100 years ago that they could never be safe in Europe. Now, 80 or so years after the establishment of Israel, nobody could credibly suggest that Jews are safer in Israel than anywhere else in the world. It's simply untrue. And I would say this before even October 7. That's the tragic irony of history here. And I fear that without massive outside pressure, akin to what happened with South Africa years ago to end apartheid, this situation will continue because Israelis need to pay a price for this ongoing apartheid that they're perpetuating.
Antony Loewenstein, always good to get your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.